Good morning, and welcome to this town hall on COVID-19, its effects on the University of Washington, and how our community is responding. I'm Jack Martin, Assistant Vice President for Communications, and I'll be facilitating today's discussion. Over the last week, we've received questions from more than 200 members of our community. A few key topics have emerged, and we'll focus on those to start the town hall. You can also email questions during the broadcast to pres@uw.edu. A full recording of the town hall will be available later if you missed part of it. To answer your questions, we have 5 UW leaders with us today. President Ana Mari Cauce, Provost and Executive Vice President for Academic Affairs, Mark Richards, Vice President for Student Life, Denzel Sweet, Chair of the Faculty Senate and a member of the faculty in the Information School, Joseph Janes, and Dean of the University of Washington School of Public Health, Hillary Godwin. To start things off, I'd like to introduce President Cauce for some opening remarks.
Thank you so much, Jack, and welcome to everyone who's watching across our campuses from UW's medicines, hospitals, clinics, and labs, and to all the students and families across Washington State, across our nation, and across the world. No doubt this has been a difficult time, and my heart is with all of you who have suffered and who are continuing to suffer during this time of crisis. I'm particularly thinking about the friends and families of the community members that we've lost to the virus. At the same time as my heart is heavy, I am so proud and grateful for the UW community's resilience and dedication. You have been truly remarkable. I need to give a big shout out and a big thank you to all those who have been on the front line of this pandemic and who are taking care of all of us. The healthcare workers, the researchers, our first responders, custodial and food service staff, and the many others who are serving our community, especially our students. To our faculty and staff, and to all of you who are keeping the university mission moving forward in this remote environment, thank you, thank you. To our students, thank you for committing to your studies and for extending such goodwill to each other. It has been absolutely so lovely to see the communities that are forming, virtual and otherwise. And to the brand new Huskies who are joining us this fall, welcome. You truly are joining an extraordinary community. We're on a journey, and I'm so glad that you'll be part of it with us. And there is some good news. The number of cases in Washington is decreasing, and the leadership of our state is working to create the conditions that will make it safe for us continuing to lift restrictions. Right now, probably just about the hardest thing to deal with is the uncertainty. I was reading an article this morning and they talked about disabling uncertainty, and I hope we don't let it disable us, but the uncertainty is very difficult. While restrictions are easing, we're still in a very fluid situation. When the stay home, stay healthy order will be lifted, we're not quite sure. And how additional restrictions will be eased depends on many things, including cases continuing to decline over the next month. We are right now doing everything and working very hard planning for an in-person autumn quarter. But the parameters of exactly what that means are still being defined. We know that's creating anxiety and tension, and it's the most frequently asked question that got mailed in, so I promise I'll get to it in a bit. And then, in addition to the health crisis, the governor has emphasized again yesterday that we're also going to have some very serious budget impacts, and I know that some of you are very worried about that. There's no question that the budget impacts will be significant, but we also know that we are taking steps right now, even before we know the full magnitude, to mitigate those impacts. And there's little doubt that we will be doing more in the year to come. This is something that, again, we will tackle as a community, putting our values first and foremost right up front. As challenging as this is, and this is no question, the most challenging period in my lifetime and certainly in my career, it has revealed incredible strength and capability across the University of Washington. We're incredibly fortunate. We have the top medical and public health experts in the country right here at the UW. And that means that when we're making our plans, we're getting the very best consultation and guidance in the country, probably in the world. So you can be proud of your University of Washington and the impact that we're having. Thank you. Look forward to questions.
Thank you, President Cauce. Dean Godwin, I'd like to start with you and hope you could help us understand how public health experts are approaching the pandemic. Specifically, what does that mean for communities as well as institutions like the University of Washington as we look at how and when we can start safely returning to a more normal way of life? For example, what factors are key to decisions on social distancing restrictions?
Thanks, Jack. So first of all, I'd like to echo President Cauce's words of condolences to those who have lost loved ones. This pandemic has been hard for everybody. That being said, here in Washington, we're incredibly proud to have elected officials who have worked really hand in hand with public health. And we have mirrored that approach here at the University of Washington to make evidence-based decisions about how to proceed. So far, you've heard a lot about flattening the curve during the last phase of the pandemic, and Washingtonians have done a great job of doing that. And so then the question becomes, what's next for us? And so a phrase that you're going to be hearing more and more often is that it's a dial, not a switch, that we are looking at slowly releasing some of those restrictions that were put into place, and then monitoring to see how things go. Hopefully things continue to improve and we can continue to dial back the restrictions, but we need to remain poised and ready to react in case we see a resurgence of cases or a new wave of cases in the future. So in order to prepare for that, the University of Washington has been going through a number of different scenarios, and we plan to keep updating that scenario planning based upon guidance that we receive from our Governor Inslee, and from our local and state health department, so that we're making decisions that are good for the health and well-being of the folks in our community and our surrounding communities. One thing that we've been careful to think about here at the University of Washington, and I know will continue to be an important core value to return to as we move forward, is to be mindful of the impacts of these decisions on our entire community, and to be flexible where possible when recognizing that different individuals in our community are experiencing different levels of impact, and making sure that we're making decisions that are good for everyone. One last thing, Jack, before we go on to the next person. A lot of people have asked me which restrictions are going to get lifted first. Of course, we're waiting to hear from Governor Inslee about that. But one rule of thumb is that we can expect that the first restrictions to get lifted will likely be the ones that were imposed last. And those restrictions that were placed early on, which were the ones that had the most protections, like restrictions on large gatherings, are probably going to be the ones that we'll see lifted in later phases. Okay, back to you, Jack.
Great, thank you. President Cauce, as you mentioned in your opening remarks, many people submitted questions asking about autumn quarter. Can you discuss the university's plans for the fall?
Absolutely, and I know that that's the question that's on everyone's mind. First of all, it's important to be clear about the fact that we monitor what is happening in terms of COVID conditions in our community, across the state and the nation on a daily basis. And we get new and better information every day, and we want to use that, the very latest information, the best information, as we continue to plan into the future. Right now, as I mentioned before, we're hard at work planning to be back in person, doing in-person instruction in the fall. But I don't think that any university leader can safely say that it's going to be business as usual or back to normal, at least the normal of, gosh, it's only been a couple of months, but sometimes it seems like decades ago. By mid-June to early July, we expect to be able to share more details about exactly what fall quarter will look like. Our plans are being developed. We have two task forces. One is a task force that's focusing on back to in-person work. And that means we'll be assessing when we can bring more of our employees, more of our staff members back to campus. The other task force is focusing on back to in-person school, preparing for having students back on campus for autumn quarter, and we're consulting with students, faculty, and staff representatives as we develop these plans. While these plans are still being developed, we know that what we're talking about is a new normal. That new normal may include some remote instruction or flipped classrooms. For example, some of our very largest lectures may be online for the lecture part of the class, but then we'll have smaller discussion sections held in person with social distancing. We expect that we'll be doing increased testing for COVID. We'll be doing contact tracing, and likely we'll be doing scan or surveillance testing in the dorms so that we can catch any potential outbreak right at the beginning and nip it in the bud. So there's a lot of factors. Again, the new normal will look a little bit different than things may have looked like fall a year ago, but we're using the very best information we have. We're consulting with the very best experts, and it's scientific knowledge and public health guidance that will be informing all of our decisions. We're also closely coordinating with all of Washington's colleges and universities, and I continue to consult with my colleagues across the country, especially other West Coast states. We're very lucky. We have a little bit more flexibility in our timeline than some universities because our quarter system starts later in September. So we'll have better information and a little bit more time to plan. But to be clear, no matter how we start the quarter, we and every other university needs to be prepared to adjust. As Hillary talked about it, as Dean Godwin talked about it just a bit ago, this is really more like a dial, and we have to be prepared to dial up and dial back things like social distancing, potentially wearing masks, and others as we learn more about the virus. It's a very fluid situation. It will continue to be so in the fall, but we're planning to come up with a great fall quarter, and I hope to be seeing you there in person.
Great, thank you, President Cauce. Another topic a lot of people asked questions about was about the economic crisis and its effects on the university's budget. Provost Richards, as the UW's Chief Budget Officer, what is the outlook for the university's finances, and how does the UW plan to prioritize if we do face significant budget cuts?
Well, thank you for that question. I have to say that this is an interesting time to be the Chief Budget Officer for a major university. In part, the obvious is that we are in a crisis, but in part because the financial nature of this crisis is different. It is very unlike, for example, in terms of its impacts on the University of Washington, the 2008-2009 crisis. For example, in that previous crisis, the primary hit was state support due to weak economy, and there are many adjustments made for that. But in this case, for example, we have very large other impacts on, for example, auxiliary units like housing and food services and athletics and so forth. During the last crisis, I don't think anybody was worried about whether or not we'd be able to have football games in the fall. So on the state side, and well, I should add to that the enormous impacts on our medical system, which is a very large part of our University of Washington, and we have no idea yet what the state and the federal government are going to be able to do to compensate for those losses. But on the state side, we have great uncertainty. The governor and the legislature have yet to give us signals that I think they are not in a position yet to really tell us what's likely to happen to the state budget. But here's what we do know. We have a 5% downturn in the economy in the first quarter. It's probably going to be worse in the second quarter. We have 20% or greater unemployment in the country, and 750,000 people in the state of Washington are newly unemployed. This has huge impacts on small businesses as well as large corporations that depend on, consumer economics like Boeing and Starbucks and Alaska Airlines, et cetera. We really don't know how this is going to wash in the state budget, but we know it's going to be bad. There are going to be billions of dollars lost from the state budget especially because of the nature of our taxation system here in the state of Washington. Add to that higher education remains a discretionary part of the state budget, which leaves us particularly vulnerable in any economic crisis. And we have a huge amount of uncertainty in what we're going to be looking at in the near future. Back to the auxiliaries, the units that are so-called self-sustaining, like housing and food services and facilities and athletics and so forth. We already know that we're going to be looking at losses of a minimum of $50 million in the coming year and probably exceeding $100 million. That's very different from previous crises, added to the uncertainty in the state funding. And of course, again, the losses for UW-Medicine are in the hundreds of millions of dollars, with a great deal of uncertainty about what compensation may be available when the dust settles from this crisis. So we have no real way of gauging with any precision what the state budget is going to look like, and therefore it is prudent for us to be exceedingly cautious in how we are budgeting, and we are stepping up to the plate on that. We have effectively prohibited all non-essential hiring and spending at the University of Washington for the near future, at least. And we are working on a variety of scenarios for mitigating costs and mitigating losses in many different units. We do expect some state forecasts and some news from the state by June. Hopefully the picture will become more apparent, although we're not looking forward to the outcome, quite frankly, by June, about what our state budget or state support situation might be. But suffice it to say that our priority is the health and welfare and well-being of our students and employees, and the core mission of teaching and research as a public university, and everything that means. We will stay true to those values and true to that true to the purpose as a public university. So I wish I had more certainty to deliver, but I think the only certainty is that we are going to be in for very, very difficult times, and that we have to plan and behave accordingly. And we are hopefully going to have better information within about a month and a half about the true consequences of the current crisis.
Thank you, Provost Richards. President Cauce, in light of this financial uncertainty, we received many questions from folks who were concerned about their jobs. What is the UW doing to protect employees' jobs, and should employees be worried about layoffs or furloughs?
Okay, yes, no, thank you. I know that that's something that people are anxious about. I want to begin by saying that sometimes people think of the University of Washington as a collection of buildings, and those buildings really are gorgeous. But, at the end of the day, the university is about a collection of people, about a community of people, and how we treat our people really, at the end of the day, says what our values are about. So very early on, we committed to no layoffs or furloughs due to COVID-19 through May 4th, which was the first stay home, stay healthy guidelines. And we did that because in the very early stages, as people were, rushing in some ways to, get unemployment, medical leave, childcare, what kinds of, federal policies we'd have, what kinds of state policies we'd have, were all kind of up in the air, being developed. People were waiting to be able to, file for unemployment. And we thought that, we really didn't want to take any actions until the important safety net functions had been put in place, and until we had better guidelines from the state and federal government about what kinds of programs might be available for those. Our goal was then, and it continues to be, that all our employment actions be as humane and supportive as possible. Our staff has been so amazing in helping us get through this crisis, and it's very, very important that we treat them well. So our first step is always to look for ways to reassign people whose roles can't be performed remotely, or where the job has just disappeared because of social distancing restrictions. Our museums, for example, are closed. Our performances are closed. So we always try and first and foremost reassign, but sometimes that's just not possible. And as this crisis is moving on, and as we haven't been able to come back yet, quite frankly, we are likely to see some limited, in some cases voluntary, in other cases what we call standby furloughs in the coming months. And the reason why we will be moving to, again, a limited number of furloughs is because we're hoping that it will help us avoid layoffs later. Again, furloughs are temporary. They allow people to get unemployment and to keep their benefits so that they retain access to health care. And that's why that's the mechanism that we look to first. Again, I see these as limited, but I don't want to, ever, lie to you. I expect that we will be doing some limited furloughs in the months to come. I also want everyone to know that we've set up an emergency financial support fund to take private contributions specifically to help staff that are having a hard time, possibly because of furloughs or other reasons. We also have one for students. And the most important thing is that we look forward to being able to help our staff get through this difficult period so that we can all be back to work and build this amazing university that we have.
Thank you. Staying on the topic of our employees, we did receive a number of questions about protections for workers against the novel coronavirus. Folks either who are currently still working on one of our campuses or who would come back to work as public health restrictions start to be relaxed. So President Cauce, I wanted to ask you, what guidelines does the university have in place to protect employees?
Okay, thank you, Jack. I know that that's an important question as well. I'm going to take a moment and proselytize a little bit more broadly and say that it really is important, whether you're coming to campus or staying at home and going out occasionally to enjoy the sunshine or to do some shopping, that we all need to be very, very, very careful. And so, this is something, things, washing your hands, not touching your face, all of those are things that we all need to be getting used to practicing regardless of what setting we're in. We do recognize, though, that following safety protocols can be especially challenging for our on-campus workers who have a lot of interaction with the public or who work in closer proximity to the public. For example, obviously our healthcare workers, but also our food service workers, for example. They are in a position where they have to interact with the public, and so being able to follow public health guidelines is a little bit more challenging. So we've developed workplace guidelines hand in hand using the expertise of the fabulous public health experts that we have on our campus. We formed actually a number of years ago, and we immediately activated it, an advisory committee on communicable diseases. We also have a group that's called Environmental Health and Safety, and of course, our UW-Medicine infectious disease experts. We consult with all of them as we're developing guidelines for our workers, for our staff. As we begin recovery, we're reviewing and updating our protocols to ensure that our employees can return to work safely. This will likely include, for example, and we're still, one of the things that I think at times can be frustrating is that the guidance does sometimes change. For example, early on, people were hearing that maybe masks weren't a great idea, and now that has changed, and we will always be looking at the very latest information that we're getting, and we'll always be changing in ways to make things safer. As we begin recovery again, we're reviewing and updating our protocols. They're likely going to include having all our staff monitor their health for possible COVID symptoms on a daily basis, and actually letting us know we're going to have employee attestations so that before employees come to work, they have to say, I'm feeling good. I don't have any of these symptoms. It's going to include probably updated masking policies and enhanced cleaning protocols, especially in communal areas and areas that are high touch, like on, guardrails, on, near staircases, etc. But I think it's worth noting that at the very peak of the curve, which was a few weeks ago, we were doing some testing of UW Medicine employees that had even mild symptoms, and we found that they were testing positive at half the rate of the public at large. So it seems to be that what we've been doing is effective, and we will need to stay diligent throughout our campus, both for our own health and for the health of our community.
Great, thank you. I'd like to turn to some questions from students and families. So I'll turn to you, Vice President Sweet. Today is National Decision Day for students all over the country, including those who have been admitted to the University of Washington. What advice do you have for new Huskies who are wondering how this crisis will affect the start of their academic careers? Oh, need you to unmute.
Yeah, that might help. Let me start by saying welcome to the new Huskies. We know there's a lot in your minds as you prepare to start your Husky experience in a time unlike anything we've faced. Nevertheless, I want you to know that we are really excited for you to join the UW community, and we're committed to ensuring that you have unparalleled opportunities to learn and to discover. I do encourage you to continue your normal process for preparing to start college in the fall. We will help you adjust if the situation calls for it. As you've heard, we're doing some scenario plannings for various options to operate safely in the fall, but final information on that will be shared shortly. I would say that regardless of how the fall unfolds, I can promise you that your UW educators will bring their expertise, their experience, and their knowledge to their courses to ensure that you have a meaningful learning experience. Also, student-focused services and programs are currently available and will remain so this summer, including advising and orientation, the libraries, health and wellness services, and even remote access to fitness classes. I encourage you to take advantage of all of them to get and stay connected. You can find a lot of information about planning for the fall by visiting the respective websites for Bothell, Tacoma, and Seattle, and all you have to do is enter the word orientation. There you will find information specific to your circumstance, whether you are an international student, transfer, or in-state or out-of-state student. And remember that financial aid eligibility remains the same whether courses are offered in person or in a remote manner. I hope this information helps.
Great, thank you. We've also received questions from current students about their experience with remote learning. Professor Janes, we're now 5 weeks into a spring quarter that has been conducted remotely. From the view of the faculty and the students that you and your colleagues are teaching, how do you think that transition has gone, and how are you measuring whether it's been successful?
Hi, Jack. Yeah, it's halftime of spring quarter, isn't it? Week 5 of a 10-week quarter. I think from my perspective, I think this has gone about as well as could be expected. We've heard lots of great stories about all the work that faculty have put in to reconfigure their classes for remote learning, all the work that students have done to help make those classes be successful. And of course, all the staff, the support staff in the various departments and units, centrally in the Center for Teaching and Learning, and the registrar's office, and advising, and student life. Everybody has just really pulled together. I've also heard from lots of friends and colleagues faculty helping each other, cooperating, sharing great ideas, how to teach various different kinds of classes in different kinds of settings, what kind of techniques are working. I think that's all just terrific. I was proud of this faculty when I took on the job as chair, and I'm even more proud now. And in terms of assessment, a lot of faculty did mid-quarter evaluations or are doing mid-quarter evaluations. I think we're going to learn a lot from that in terms of helping to make this quarter's classes go well, in addition to future uses of remote and virtual technologies. There will be end of quarter evaluations too. And I think that will help us to just continue to improve how we're doing things. While I have a moment, I want to speak to a handful of specific communities with just a few words. First of all, to my colleagues on the faculty, I want to thank you for all of your creativity and ingenuity and persistence. We all know that this great transition from one kind of teaching to another has been hard and with very little notice. People have just really pulled together and done incredible work, and thank you for that. While we're talking about assessment, I would also encourage us as faculty to spend a moment now to think about a variety of policies and procedures and criteria that we use on a range of issues, and think about adapting those to the current situation, to be a little more compassionate, to continue to promote equity and inclusion for everybody. There are lots of mechanisms to do that in departmental meetings, in elected faculty councils. Use those mechanisms, use those opportunities to work together on those kinds of policies and procedures. I also want you to know that shared governance is continuing to function. We just had a Senate meeting yesterday to move a number of changes to scholastic regulations. We in Senate leadership have been engaged with administration on a number of levels over the last several months. We've been included, we've been consulted, we've contributed to the decision-making process. And so our strong tradition of shared governance at the university continues. On behalf of my colleagues on the faculty, I want to speak to students for just a second. As Denzel just said, to our new students, to our newest Huskies and your families, I just want to thank you. I want to thank you for choosing us. I want to thank you for trusting us. Please know that everybody here is working super hard to make your experience the best it can possibly be. We can't wait to have you be part of our community this fall, and we're really looking forward to welcoming you. And to our current students, we know this is hard. We know how hard you're working, and in many cases, many of you are working in circumstances that are far from ideal. We appreciate it. I was on campus yesterday afternoon for a little while, and our campus is still beautiful, but it's not half as beautiful as it is with all of you. People walking in and out of Kane, people studying in the libraries, people sitting at the tables in Mary Gates, eating at the Hub, tabling on Red Square. We miss you. We miss you desperately, and we can't wait until we can all be together again.
Great, thank you. Provost Richards, we also received questions from students and families about tuition. They asked, since classes are online this quarter, why has tuition not been reduced for out-of-state students or just in general?
Thank you for that question. We get that question a lot from both parents and students, and it's quite understandable. I have to say that this is a route hits pretty close to home. I have one daughter who's a senior in high school and one daughter who's a senior in college, both of whom have not only had to abruptly find that they're learning online 100%, but they miss their friends. We're going celebrating their graduations. They're not getting to enjoy senioritis with their friends that they've gone to school with so long. And it's a very disorienting and disruptive and disturbing time for students in all of our schools and colleges in this country. In terms of the transition to remote learning, it's very, very challenging. And I have to say that I'm incredibly proud of the University of Washington faculty, as Professor Janes and President Cauce have said. I'm also very proud of our students. We get lots of feedback about concerns that students have about the accessibility of courses and difficulties that they're having tracking remote instruction. But that feedback and those concerns, I have to say, have been constructive and respectful in ways that frankly make it easier for us to respond constructively and address the problems. So I really want to say that there has been an incredible effort and diligence to make this work. Of the over 7,000 courses that we normally teach in a typical spring quarter, I think we only lost about 175 of them, which comes to about 2.5% of our courses, some of which just simply cannot be done remotely. And that's an amazing accomplishment. I will not pretend, we can pretend that the overall quality of instruction remotely is the same, especially on such short notice, as it might have been in person. But I can tell you that the cost of instruction has actually increased, not decreased, because of many of the measures that we've had to take on very short notice to make this all work. And we do have to pay our faculty and our staff the same as before. So our ability to remediate tuition would be extremely limited. The other point I would make, people do ask about this question of why are you still charging out-of-state or non-resident students more tuition for remote instruction? I want to point out that the out-of-state non-resident tuition represents more or less the true cost of education at the University of Washington. Resident students are paying lower tuition. The taxpayers of the state of Washington, that is their parents and families, are paying for the state contribution to their education. So that's really not related in any way directly to remote instruction or to factors that people might think would come into play in that decision. We have reduced some fees. For example, we've eliminated the UPass, the public transportation fee for students. We have eliminated the late tuition payment fee and the re-enrollment fee for students who took off the spring quarter and plan to re-enroll in the fall or winter. Those are small measures, admittedly, but hopefully will be considered in good faith.
Great, thank you. Received a lot of questions about commencement. As folks know, the restrictions on large events mean that the UW won't be able to hold commencement in June for our thousands of graduates and their families. Vice President Sweet, why is the UW not planning an in-person ceremony for this class as soon as it is safe to hold it, as some other universities have been saying they plan to do as early as this summer?
Yeah, I would say postponing the in-person ceremony is one of the hardest, most disappointing decisions that we've made. If you ask the faculty and staff on campus to pick their favorite day, it would be graduation, hands down. Yet we knew that doing actually 2 ceremonies was the right course of action for the health and safety of our students, their parents, grandparents, and in some cases, great-grandparents, and others who attend our ceremony. I want you to know that before we made this decision, we did consult with several others, including student leaders on the Provost Advisory Council, academic leadership, regents, Office of Ceremonies, public health officials, and others. They all agreed that we just simply couldn't predict when it will be safe or feasible for thousands of people to gather in person. As you heard Dean Godwin note earlier, restrictions on large public gatherings will not end anytime soon. Logistics of an event of this size that attracts 50 to 60,000 people means that it can't be scheduled and then canceled without months of planning, not to mention the travel limitations that many will face in the months ahead. So in addition to the virtual live ceremony for all 3 campuses, which I might point out will include a Twitch stream option that will allow us to cut to your location and see you celebrating with your immediate family in real time, 2020 graduates will be fully recognized in person in 2021 when it's safe to have these large gatherings on their campuses. It's also important to note that if enough graduates from the class of 2020 want to return to the 2021 commencement ceremony, we are fully prepared to organize a second separate ceremony. Whatever we decide, student leaders will be involved. We will also survey graduating students to help us make that decision. So stay tuned. It's also possible that between now and then, departments and schools may wish to honor their graduates in their own ceremonies, as has been done in the past. Again, all of this will follow public health guidance, but the key takeaway is that 2020 graduates will have 2 ceremonies, and we hope everyone will attend both.
Great, thank you. I'd like to stay with you. We did receive a number of questions about emergency aid for students. Obviously, the economic crisis is affecting students and their families. I'm wondering if you, Vice President Sweet, you can talk a little bit about the financial assistance that is available for students from the university, as well as the CARES funding from the federal government.
Sure. So financial aid packages, including the Husky Promise, are still in effect, and our commitment to our students remains unwavering. We've been providing emergency aid to students from existing aid programs on all 3 campuses, and I encourage students to visit the dedicated emergency aid site for more information. We also have the CARES Act grants that you mentioned from the federal government, which prioritizes low and lower middle income students based on the information on their financial aid application. CARES Act funding is available for undergrads and grads and professional students. And UW is using the CARES funds by issuing standardized relief grants of $1,200 per student, or an additional $500 or $1,700 for students with dependents. And again, this is all based on the family income reported on your FAFSA. While CARES funds don't apply to international, undocumented, non-matriculated students or students enrolled in distance-only degree programs, UW will provide grants to undocumented students, international students, and others who meet the same criteria. And so if you didn't receive a CARES grant but believe you are eligible, or if your financial needs have changed, as many have, please contact the financial aid office. And also remember that for anyone who needs food assistance, the UW pantries are still providing free food to anyone with a Husky card on all 3 campuses. Finally, and as you heard, the president mentioned, she has asked that we establish an employee aid fund that will be coming online shortly, and more details will be forthcoming from UW Human Resources.
Great, thank you. Professor James, did you want to jump in here?
I just wanted to follow up on Denzel's comments about commencement. As he was speaking, he said that commencement was the one day on campus that everybody, faculty, staff, everybody are look forward to. And as he was saying that, I could see smiles on everybody else's faces. He's absolutely right. And there's no better day than commencement. And one of the saddest parts of all of this is that we're not going to be able to have the kind of commencement we all expected to have in Husky Stadium. It's an extraordinary day. I have great students who are going to graduate, and I'm going to hug them for all they're worth in Husky Stadium. What I would encourage our students to do is to participate in the virtual ceremony that's going to happen. It's going to be different, like everything's different right now. And please, 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 please come back. If there's any way for you to come back so that we can have another ceremony for you next year, please do it. The idea of having 2 imagine the ovation you will get when we do another 2020 commencement for you next year. It's going to be an extraordinary thing. Please, please. It's a moment in your lives that you'll never forget, and the opportunity to do it with you in person next year would be just amazing.
President Cauce, did you want to jump in? Unmute.
I wanted to tell a bit of a personal story in terms of a delayed graduation, so to speak. When I had already taken a job before I totally completed my PhD. And so I was already working elsewhere when my graduation was to happen. And for financial reasons, et cetera, it didn't make sense for me to return. So in fact, it was my first year as a faculty member at the University of Washington about 33, 34 years ago. And, I got to march as a marshal. And so my mother came up with me, and we took our picture at the fountain, and my graduation portrait is at University of Washington. And I can tell you that even though it was 3 years after I graduated, walking down, having my mom with me, taking a picture, it was really, really meaningful. And I hope that our students, they won't be doing it alone like I did. They'll be doing it together with their classmates. And I can just tell you that the roar of applause that the class of 2020 will get when they walk across in spring 2021 will just be amazing. So please, you're the class of 2020, so you have 2 built into your name. You have 2 graduations coming, and we'll be there.
Great. Thank you all. I want to get to one of the questions that has come in over the course of the town hall. We've talked about autumn quarter. Question here about the B term of summer quarter. And so Provost Richards, are you able to address when we will know the plans for B term of summer quarter, whether that will be remote instruction as the A term and full term courses have been?
Let me start by saying that there is always kind of a decision timeline that we face, and those timelines are difficult to determine. Again, we're kind of in unprecedented times. We made the decision a few weeks ago that the summer session would have to begin remotely, as well as there's a full summer session, and then there's a summer A and a summer B, which are roughly half the duration of the full summer session. So the full summer session in summer A, we had to make a decision that it would be remote, and in retrospect, that has probably worked out pretty well and will work out well. However, we did at the time maintain that as conditions changed, the summer B session might provide some opportunities for in-person instruction, especially for smaller groups, smaller classes that involve laboratory or practicum or clinical experiences and so forth. And we are sticking with that hope that we will be able to convene some of those classes in the summer B session and perhaps even make up for some of the things that were lost in the spring quarter. As for fall quarter, as President Cauce began this whole Q&A thing saying, we are going to have the University of Washington in session for the fall quarter. We do not know what fraction of our courses will be remote and which ones will be in person. We are hoping, of course, to have as many in person as good health guidelines allow. It is frankly difficult to imagine convening very large lecture courses with the knowledge that we have right now, but we have full flexibility and some time to make that decision. We're at somewhat of an advantage at the University of Washington because our fall quarter begins late September, and frankly, other universities will be experimenting in advance of us with how to convene that fall quarter. In terms of a decision timeline, we have spoken of trying to make decisions as well as possible for fall quarter by probably the end of June or of July timeframe. That is not firm because we're living in a world that's changing around us very rapidly. But simultaneously, we're hoping to construct both summer session B and the fall quarter, not only to offer the courses that we normally offer, but to keep in mind courses that may have fallen by the wayside in this crisis, where students need certain course requirements to graduate or make good progress toward their degrees or fulfill prerequisites and so forth. So we are undertaking literally an inventory of the thousands of courses offered by the 3 campuses at the University of Washington, and really literally beginning the process of course by course, trying to figure out what the various scenarios are and what we can offer, how we can make up for lost ground in the process. I'd like to perhaps invite Professor Godwin, our Dean of School of Public Health, to comment on what I've said about decision timelines. I'm a geophysicist and she's a public health expert, and you'd probably get more information from her than from me on what I said about the decision timeline for fall quarter.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. So as you've heard, we are trying to make the best decisions that we can in a time of great uncertainty. And the path forward for that is doing these detailed scenario building and taking advantage of the fact that we have a long lead time until fall quarter. I think, we remain committed to doing what's best for the public health and safety of our students, and acknowledging that we're in a time of uncertainty. So I guess I would say for the answer to that, stay tuned, recognizing that we know that people want to hear something sooner rather than later. So.
Great, thank you both. Professor Janes, another topic of interest was around students' academic progress. Can you talk about what the university is doing to make sure that the crisis does the least possible damage to students' GPAs and their academic careers in the future, such as getting into majors, graduate schools, and the like?
Sure. I have a very high-tech visual aid here to explain what we're thinking about. This is the kind of stuff you get at moments like this. It's an asterisk kind of quarter, and it's an asterisk kind of quarter in a lot of different ways. The short answer is we are working on ways. The Faculty Senate actually yesterday passed a couple of things that'll change the scholastic regs that will make, I think, make life a little easier on students in a number of ways, both currently and ongoing. That work is continuing, more is coming. We recognize, everybody knows, let's just be honest about this. Everybody knows this is a quarter like no other. This is a time like no other in the careers of students and also in the careers of faculty. To the extent any of us can, and I think I speak for all of us here, we want to do whatever we can to sort of hold everybody harmless this quarter. Recognizing the kind of uniqueness of this situation. And it's not unique to us. It's all over the country. It's all over the world. We all know everybody is experiencing these kinds of obstacles. From the faculty perspective, the Provost's office announced that people approaching tenure decisions are going to have a chance to delay their clock for a year. That's a tremendous opportunity. We're very pleased about that. But I would also say to all of my colleagues in all the departments and units, for all different kinds of personnel decisions, promotion decisions, et cetera, thinking now about the kind of language you want to put in solicitation letters for promotions, just so that everybody remembers that we all need a little grace at this point. I think that's time well spent. Again, those kinds of things that we can do to give each other a little bit of space, to give each other some understanding about this situation, both on behalf of the students and on behalf of the faculty. The more we can have a kind of, sense of grace and compassion about all this, I think the better off we all are.
Yeah, President Cauce.
Professor Janes was saying, we know each other quite well. I think it's important that there are some things that we can't control. The virus, we're still learning new things about it all the time. It is novel, and we call it novel for a reason. But there are things that we can control. We can choose to be compassionate. We can choose to be kind. And I think that is what this quarter is all about. People are not going to forget 2020. And when they are judging you and your body of work, whether you're a faculty member or a student, I really do believe that they will do so with the ultimate compassion and kindness. And quite frankly, if they don't, you don't want to go there.
Yeah, Dean Godwin.
Just to echo that, I've been hearing from students in my school, and I'm sure it's true in others, about that they're getting stressed out right now. It's midterms. It's not surprising. That's a lot of additional stress on top of what's an extraordinarily stressful situation. And I would just encourage all of the students who are in the audience, whether you're currently Huskies or you're prospective Huskies, to be compassionate to yourself as well, and understand that the rest of us understand fully what you're going through and are being compassionate with you, but be kind to yourself the same way that you would be kind to your best friend who is unquestionably going through the same thing as well. Take good care of yourself, get good sleep, get out there and enjoy the beautiful sunshine with social distancing this weekend, enjoy nature. connect with the people that you love, support each other, but also take good care of yourself. This is a really unprecedented and difficult time.
Thank you. Professor James, you wanted to add something?
Just one quick thing on top of all that great advice from Hillary Godwin. For students, for current students in our classes this quarter, as I mentioned, people were doing mid-quarter evaluations and so on. You can help your faculty to help you by helping them to understand your situation and circumstances. If there's something in your class that's working well, tell your faculty. If there's something in your class that could be done differently or better that would help you, please tell your faculty. That's the only way they're going to know that, making a change on a Canvas site, making a change in the way they record their lectures, doing something like that, helping them, giving them ideas and suggestions, helping them to understand that is going to enable them to do a much better job on your behalf, and everybody will benefit. So please reach out, please share that in a constructive, thoughtful, professional way. Your faculty will really appreciate that.
Great. Thank you all. We have time for one more question because we're coming up here on noon. This will be for Vice President Sweet. We've had some questions come in during the broadcast about housing. Can you provide some guidance to both current students and incoming students about whether they should apply for campus housing on one of our campuses for the fall?
Yes, and I can speak mostly to Seattle campus, but I believe this is true for all three, and that you should continue to apply for housing in the normal fashion. We have actually already started the returning resident process. And so students who currently have agreements with us are in the process of signing up again for next year. Shortly after, in the next week, information will be open for students to start reserving spaces in housing. We anticipate being able to house students, but the configuration of what that will look like is still being developed. We do have a few spaces with shared bathrooms, but most of our spaces actually have private baths for 2 or 3 individuals. The bottom line, keep applying. And apply when for the new students, apply when the application process opens, and then we will be in constant contact with you throughout the summer.
Great, thank you. That is all the time that we have. We're coming up on noon. I'll remind folks that if you missed part of the broadcast, you can watch a replay at uw.edu/president/townhall. We are planning additional town halls, including one focused on student questions, so please stay tuned for more details on those. You can also find answers to many questions about COVID-19 and the university's response to the pandemic at uw.edu/coronavirus. There you'll also find links to resources for students and employees, information on upcoming webinars by UW faculty, and details on how UW experts are contributing to the fight against the coronavirus. Thank you to all of our panelists. Thank you to everyone who submitted to question, and to all of you for watching. Stay safe and go Huskies.